Here are some legal traps that you need to be aware of when you're out on the road. Some of these catch people out in ways you couldn't even imagine. Some people even debate them like it's the absolute truth, when in fact they're just misconceived on what the law actually is. The first of all, I'm going to talk about mobile phones. There's been some recent updates to the law with mobile phones, using a phone when you're driving. And just as a brief note of gratitude for this pen, this is not a sponsored video in any sense, just a note of gratitude to Wigs and Pens for sending me this pen. This is a unique handcrafted pen from the stringers of an original KA114 Mosquito wing, which were unique because they were constructed almost entirely of wood. Check them out in the description below. Now, the broad principle is this. Under the Road Vehicles Construction and Use Regulations 1986, the updated version of Regulation 110 means that you are prohibited from using a handheld mobile phone whilst you're driving. Now, there's lots of different ways that people misinterpret this. Some people think that as long as it's in a cradle, you can use it as much as you need to because it's in a cradle and it's not handheld. Now, whilst strictly speaking it's not caught by this specific regulation, it will still very often amount to careless driving if you are interacting and using that phone whilst it's on the cradle. Because if it's on the cradle and you're looking at it and you're using it and pressing buttons on it, that is almost always going to amount to careless driving or driving without due care and attention, because you are not paying proper attention to the road because you're paying attention to the mobile phone. So many people are driving along, punching away at text messages and things of this nature whilst it's in a cradle, thinking that it's okay because it's in the cradle. But this is not true, because if you are caught doing things like this, you are going to face serious penalties for driving without due care and attention. Other people seem to think that if you've got your phone in your hand like this and it's on speakerphone, you know the people I'm talking about, they're walking around or driving around with it like this, thinking that it's hands-free because it's not here. It's only there on loudspeaker. That doesn't count because it's still in your hand. So if it's in your hand at all, at any time, you'll be caught by these regulations. But also, it doesn't just go for phones. It goes for any other device that does any kind of interactive communication or any of the long list of things that was weaved into these regulations. So even drafting a message on your watch is going to amount to a breach of these regulations. So please be careful about doing any of these things. It really is a bugbear of mine because it really does take your attention off the road and it does cause fatalities. If you are not swayed by the safety aspect of all this, allow me to sway you with the £200 fine, 6 penalty points on your driving licence, and maybe required to attend court depending on the seriousness of what you are doing, in which case the fine might be up to £1,000 or £2,500 if you're operating a bus or a coach or some other kind of heavy goods vehicle. Plus, if the court thinks you are driving so carelessly, there is a discretionary ban. But thinking about the points aspect, many people have got 6 points on their driving license and don't realise that just driving around having a conversation with the phone like this might result in 6 more points, meaning you end up with 12, meaning there'll be an obligatory ban for 6 months unless you can show exceptional hardship. And exceptional hardship is not just this is going to be really inconvenient for me, because that's kind of the idea. There are some narrow exceptions, such as paying for something with contactless payment using your phone as long as you are parked, you are stationary, and you are literally paying for it and then you drive on. And of course, in absolute emergencies when you have no choice whatsoever, let's say you've got someone weaving around all over the motorway and you feel like you absolutely must call the police because they're going to cause a 20-car pileup, then you'd probably be forgiven for holding your phone. Probably still better to do it like this, but to dial the police to get them there immediately. Another trap to watch out for is that some people seem to think that you don't need to wear your seatbelt if you're only driving a short distance. But of course, that's not true. You need to be wearing your seatbelt if you're driving at all. And that includes both you as the driver, and as the driver, you are responsible for anybody under the age of 14. And again, the penalties can include a fine and points on your license. This is under the Road Traffic Act, section 14. Some people, now I find this a rather strange one, fall for the trap of thinking that if you've been out for a drink, but you've then been to sleep, that you'll be okay to drive. Now, doctors among you will know that that's absolute nonsense, but for the rest of you that are just not aware of this, your body doesn't just automatically get rid of all of the alcohol in your system just because you've been to sleep. Or, as some people think, if you've had a coffee, you've drank lots of water, you've had a meal and all of these kind of things. So if you have a lot of alcohol in your system, or any alcohol that might make you impaired for driving, you really had better sober up before you get behind the wheel. Because many people think that if you've had a sleep, or you've had a coffee, or you've had a meal, then you'll be all right to drive. And linked with that is some people think that if you've even only had a little bit and you're still under the limit, then you'll be perfectly fine to drive. But that's not true either. Because the different offences for drink driving are not just that you're over the limit, but that you are impaired to drive through drink or drugs. Meaning if a police officer believes that you are not in a fit state to drive, regardless of being under the limit, you can still be prosecuted and you can still be convicted, and that is still a drink driving offence. Some people believe, although some of you might find it difficult to believe, that some people believe that it's legal to drive over the speed limit if you're in a hurry for some reason, such as going to the hospital, or you're late for some kind of appointment or something like that. But the Road Traffic Regulation Act Section 17 makes it an offence to exceed the speed limit in any circumstances. Whilst it might be a mitigating factor if you were taken to court for speeding and you challenged it and you ended up in court and you're arguing over the mitigation for what penalty you might receive, it may be some kind of mitigation to say somebody was in hospital and you were rushing there, but it's still not a defence. It's not a defence at all, in fact. It might just be a mitigation that somebody might take pity on you for, but depending on how fast you were going, the area, how built up it was, whether there was any collision, all those kind of things, it's probably not going to make that much of a difference at all. Sticking with speed, many people fall for the trap that speed cameras are not accurate, or that there are lots of tips and tricks and loopholes to get out of a speeding offence. Now, the only absolute defence to speeding is that it wasn't you, or you weren't in fact speeding, but the latter is much more difficult to prove. If it wasn't in fact you, and there is a factual mistake on the number plate, and it just quite literally wasn't you, or you've been written to as the keeper of the vehicle but you weren't driving and you nominate someone that was, then that's another matter. But otherwise, if in fact it was you in the vehicle and you are accused of speeding, many people seem to think that you can very easily, and lots of TikTok videos seem to suggest that you can very easily challenge the evidence against you. Whilst it is possible to challenge this evidence, you really ought to be aware that the reality is that these speed cameras are highly calibrated, regularly tested, and they are calibrated to ensure their accuracy on a regular basis. And it's worth adding that if anybody tampers with these devices, it will be a criminal offence under the Road Traffic Act 1988, sections 22 and 23. And finally, another strange myth and trap that I came across recently was when somebody quite boldly said that you're allowed to park anywhere you like so long as you have your hazard lights on. Now, the reality, of course, is not so simple. Hazard lights are only intended for use in your emergency situations, and it has to be a genuine emergency. For example, you're broken down and there's nothing you can do about it. Then you should, of course, use your hazard lights, use one of those warning markers several hundred yards up the road if at all possible, if you have one. But Rule 116 of the Highway Code makes it very clear that using your hazard warning lights should only be used when your vehicle's stationary and temporarily obstructing traffic in a genuine emergency. And this is backed up by the Road Vehicles Construction and Use Regulations 1986, Regulation 27, which sets out the misuse of hazard warning lights and can result in fines and points on your license if they are being misused. So in short order, there is no excuse for breaking the speed limit, and in fact the court is likely to take a harsher view if you come up with some kind of excuse to try to justify why you are speeding, because this is taken to be a disregard for the safety of other road users because you're putting your insert whatever it was reason in front of the safety of other people. So you're effectively saying to the court, if you think about this logically, you're effectively saying to the court, well, I put my need to get to whatever appointment it was before the safety of other road users. That's why I was breaking the law and breaking the speed limit and putting others in danger. the court is likely to take a harsher view because it wants to stamp out this putting yourself first approach. So in the simplest of possible terms, don't break the speed limit. So as always, please make sure you drive safely. Please don't listen to myths and silly things on the internet that people tell you you can and cannot do. Remember, if you use some common logic and sense, if it sounds like something that you shouldn't be doing, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. And if you're still unsure, then you should take legal advice about it. Because it's always better to check than to find out when you're being questioned by the police. I hope you found this useful. Please do smash that like button right now. Make sure you subscribe and share my video with somebody that will probably disagree with some of this so that you can tell them that they're wrong, and help me reach 1 million subscribers. And in the meantime, thank you for watching.